Hello, welcome to part 2. What you're currently seeing is part 1 to this video where I cover The Family, which I uploaded yesterday, and I would greatly recommend you watch that before this one, as I'm going to skip all introductions and jump straight into track analyses, as the backstory and expectations for this record were made clear in part 1. So let's get started.
Texas boy, the way I love it, man.
TM begins with a banger intro, FMG, and by golly, it's so good to have Brockhampton back, because this fixes a lot of the problems I had with the previous record. You've got the tight flow from Kevin to begin the song, but then we reach levels lyrically that were never achieved in The Family on verse 2, because the lovely Don McLennan comes in with some brilliant wordplay and slick lines. Matt's verse isn't as interesting flow-wise, but features some really humorous lyrics that you can't help but smile at. The beat is really grimy and works well for the tune, with its sustained ambient tones, warping synths, and snare and bass lines. Good opener with a whole lot of attitude. We immediately move on to Animal, and immediately my problems with this project begin, because as you'll see in the remainder of this review, I'm not too crazy about some of these songs. The problem I believe fundamentally begins when you realise that these are shelved recordings not made with a final album in mind necessarily, and it doesn't matter how good of a producer the people working on this are, there's no changing the intent of the artists. I'll expand on this when I get to my inclusion, but the flows in Animal don't enthrall me the way that Brockhampton usually does, or even the way that The Family did. I think the production is pleasant, but not anything to gawk at. It's a little too poppy and stylized, with snare strikes and bass lines I find to be a tad too heavy, and the lyrics aren't anything to write home about either. Listerine once again doesn't sound like the vibrant and colourful Brockhampton we know and love. To me it sounds a little bit generic and almost tacky, like every other average hip-hop artist of today. There's nothing interesting about any element of this track, or the last one. This is probably my least favourite from the record easily. New Shoes is amazing though. Kevin opens up with a bold and energetic entrance to a masterfully produced and zen beat. The bass powerfully pulses through these verses, and Matt not only kills it instrumental-wise, but also rapping-wise with one of his best verses on a Brockhampton track. Merlin, however, absolutely steals the show with his verse, and immediately after goes on to harmonise with Jabari in an excessively smooth and catchy hook. Really loving this one, and it was a great choice for a single. It's definitely one I'm going to be listening to on repeat for a while. But are they able to continue this newfound momentum after two of their weakest tracks? Yes. Yes, they are, because Keep It Southern is another one of my favourites on this thing. This is actually a track we first heard on one of the band's technical difficulty streams back in the day, but they've made some changes in this album version, some for better and some for worse. For one, the production is far less padded, boasting a minimalist piano beat, and I think it's a change that works a lot better for this song, really forcing you to listen to those bouncy vocals. They also removed Matt and Bareface's verses for some reason, which admittedly I'm not as much of a fan of. I'll link the original version in the description, but I don't know, I just think that it's a bit of an odd move considering the quality of those verses. Irregardless of all that, it's good to finally have a professionally produced and official version of the track that people were so confused as to why it had been scrapped in the first place. And original aside, it's a real bop with another brilliant chorus from Kevin and some of Merlin's best work too. I just wish it went on for longer because it's not even 2 minutes. Perhaps if they left in those verses it could have been even better. From this point forward, the album takes a more R&B inspired sound and approach. This newfound approach starting with Man on the Moon, which was once again teased during the technical difficulty streams. But instead of minimizing the album version like they did in the last one, they add some high tempo drum beats and a dance break at the end, as well as a verse from Champion and a bridge from Joba. The changes on this one work a lot better than the last one, even if I don't prefer the song. I think Champion's verse is my favourite addition, particularly because of those almost boastful dancing instrumentations in the background that exude such a great charm. The dance floor style synths work for the most part, though I do think that they're a tad overused. To be honest, I could see this one really growing on me and becoming one of my favourite Brockhampton songs, period. Matt really killed it with this one. Upon second and third listen, I already enjoy it more than I first did. Yeah, I really love this one. Moving on. Better Things once again continues this great momentum that we have at the moment, really encapsulating the feeling of finality that us fans were yearning for, even despite the shelved verses. The lyrics, whether it be intentional or not, can very easily be spun and understood as a band sentiment for the end of this chapter in their lives. I mean, the very theme of this one, as the title implies, is moving on to better things. Honestly, the project continues to outdo itself in ways that I didn't think even were possible. Whenever I think it's peaked, it gets better and better. The production is so sweet and dreamy, the vocal harmonies are mixed perfectly, the lyrics are hard-hitting, and Kevin's verse is appropriate and slick without ruining the stoic vibe of the track, which is such a difficult balance to pull off. But in classic Brockhampton style, they do it and they do it well. Crucify Me is certainly one of the band's most grand and ambitious tracks that the band has ever made, which is very fitting for a final album, once again delivering on what us fans wanted from the family, which at this point is difficult to be annoyed at because of the existence of TM, which forgives a lot of the family's issues. The first half of this track is good, sort of a continuation of the last one, as it shares a lot of its qualities, but as it progresses past the 2.5 minute mark, we get an almost jazz solo that really propels it to heavenly levels, becoming messier and messier, but in a very organized and intentional way, in classic Brockhampton style. Duct Tape I'm not as optimistic about, unfortunately. It's not as bad as the tracks 2 and 3, but I don't think it's mixed as well as the rest of the album is. The vocals and lyrics in particular are quite hard to discern and make out. It's the longest song on the record, but none of it really stands out. The production is nice, but I don't think they ride it as well as I know they can. Perhaps this is just due to the difficulties of not being really able to record together. I don't think it ruins the momentum or brings the album's prose to a halt or anything, it's just a bit of an underwhelming one for me. I'd be curious to know how others felt about this one. Always Something begins, like most songs, with a hook from Kevin, and I don't think it's his best work, but it does a decent job continuing the vibe of the album, even if I do think it's a little bit bland. Luckily, Dom kills it on this track as he does with most. Joba also delivers one of the best verses on the album before harmonizing with Kev as they say goodbye to all those troubled nights. Honestly, brilliant. Not one of the album's best, but a bloody good tune nonetheless. The final track, fittingly titled Goodbye, is a relatively brief and emotional one, where Joba and Matt deliver some real somber verses. You could really imagine credits rolling to the sound of this one. Despite having their ups and downs, it's acknowledged that the band wouldn't change it for the world, and that ultimately, this boy band was the best time of their lives. It's a great send-off, made even more impressive by the impractical and unconventional method of production and unused recordings. I've got to admit, the majority of my skepticisms regarding this project were absolutely proven wrong, and it worked so much better than what I was expecting, especially after the slight disappointment we felt from the family, which is nowhere near as offensive as I found it yesterday, by the way. TM is an appropriate enough ending to Brockhampton that actually strengthens the emotional resonance of the family, and I'm very happy with these two final projects. Even if there were some stinkers in there, even if some of the songs focused more on sentiment and vibes rather than actually sounding good and listenable, I think it's better sonically than the family. It has more good songs, a more fitting track and album length, but slightly weaker lyrics. And even if the project was more predictable and generic than Brockhampton's previous projects, probably due to once again the shelved recordings, it still acts as a brilliant send-off for the greatest boy band to have ever lived. I'm going to give TM by Brockhampton a 7 out of 10. Thank you for watching. As always, likes, comments and subscriptions are very much appreciated. Much love to you all. Bye.